Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Beyond Second Cognition. I'm Beall. The title of this discussion is Explaining Dimensions and Some Myth-Busting. First thing I want to do is a little bit of myth-busting, particularly in reference to all this ley line nonsense that they have prevalent in the New Age and spiritual arenas and UFO arenas. The concept of ley lines was first proposed by an amateur archaeologist by the name of Alfred Watkins, who in 1921 experienced a revelation that he noticed things lined up in what he figured were straight lines and used as indicators in ancient civilizations to navigate between places. His ideas pretty much didn't go anywhere. It was considered bad archaeology. But in the modern era, it was picked up in 1969 by John Michell, who was an English author and esotericist. And he started pushing this stuff along with his interest in ufology. And in a book he wrote in 1969, The View Over Atlantis, it really took wing, so to speak. The truth of the matter is, people can look at things and they can draw straight lines just about to anything to connect one point to another. But because they can do this, they developed an entire esoteric theory around it. Oh, these places are power points on the earth and all this other kind of nonsense that people put out there in reference to that. Oh, it's on the ley lines. The ley lines are totally arbitrary. There's no sound argument for any of it. I will admit that there are points on this planet that do have certain power points, but they have nothing to do with ley lines. Science has proposed a theory based on string theory that there are 10 dimensions. Now, if you want to read about this, just go out to Google and look up 10-dimension theory. It's easy to find. I'm not going to comment on materialist scientific theorizing because these people interpret everything from a purely 3D materialist point of view, trying to fit what they understand about the universe, which really isn't very much, into a 3D thinking box. The dimensions are set up as frequencies. You have read a little bit of legitimate material in the spiritual stuff about densities. Okay, the third dimension is pretty dense. They say the fourth dimension is time, which is, again, scientific speculation based on Einstein's theories. But each dimension is a frequency. I'm going to use the example of bandwidth on a radio station to explain how frequencies work. If you look at a radio dial, you have certain frequencies where the stations dial in perfectly, 94.5 or 98.6 or whatever. And either side of those direct frequencies, you can pick up sort of like fuzzy noise from overlapping frequencies. This is kind of how the dimensions are. Each dimension has a frequency bandwidth, and there is some overlap between frequencies, what I would call sort of a gray zone, where the frequencies can intermix. Now, this planet is one of a small number within the multiverse that can actually facilitate generating multiple frequencies at the same time. And each dimension and dimensional frequency is an inhabited dimension like this one is. Many of these tales of the ancient gods, they were here on the planet and then they disappeared. Most of them originated from different dimensional frequencies. Dimensional frequencies are sort of like the light spectrum. Humans can't see into the infrared, as one simple example. And because we are in a third dimensional form, with 3D capabilities, we generally can't see into the other dimensions because we don't have the facilities from a 3D body function to see across those barriers into those higher frequencies and see the beings that live there. Esotericists have made the incorrect assumption for generations that just because you can't see something, it must be etheric and non-physical. This is an erroneous assumption. People can talk across a dimensional spectrum through a form of psychic telepathy or whatever you want to call it, without being able to see their physical forms. But it takes practice and skill and attunement to be able to cross this dimensional frequency barrier in a psychic fashion of that nature. Now, I'm not talking about the channeled shit that the hive did by communicating with hive cells and people, because they all had the same frequency, more or less. It was a frequency resonance. Well, here's the overall hive and here's the individual hive cell, and to be able to communicate with the individual hive cell, it was not the same thing as crossing dimensional barriers. But each dimensional frequency, the further we go up the ladder, so to speak, and it's not really linear, the less dense the form of the entities that inhabit it. And I have some speculation on this, which I'm not going to cover in this video because I don't have the idea fully hammered out of my head. I have my ideas, and I'll probably save it for one of the books we're fixing to write. But the dimensions, if you look at them as frequencies, as inhabited frequencies that go beyond our perceptions because we live within the 3D bandwidth, then you start to get a little bit better picture of how the cosmos is structured. Another fallacy that humans will reach a conclusion on when they say the higher dimensions, they think that this stuff is set up in like concentric layers, that there's one built atop the other. And that's not really how the multiverse is structured. The dimensional frequencies are more interwoven like a tapestry, to where, different dimensional frequencies have crux points. What they call the ley lines, in many respects, I think, are probably frequency junctions to where the energy can be felt, and the dimensional barriers are a little bit weaker, and people can feel these things. Again, I can't state that with absolute assurance, but this is one explanation for a lot of these so-called power points around the planet. It's definitely not ley lines. But the scientific conjecture based on string theory, I'm not seeing anything that talks remotely about the dimensions being different frequencies. And it is the frequency barrier that Soika advancement allows our consciousness to transcend. We are able to move across this frequency barrier and have the capability to dial in to information from across the multiverse the more we elevate our Soika capabilities through the energy downloads that enhance the form's capability to dial in on the frequency, so to speak. You have to sort of look at the human body like one of those satellite arrays where they're out there with their ears on waiting to receive signals. The human body works the same way, except the signals it receives are through enhanced energetic capabilities developed through moving the nervous system into a higher state of receptibility through being able to pick up more subtle energies. So when you think of other dimensions, don't think of this linear stuff. Even though we call it up the ladder, it's not a linear progression. The dimensional frequencies are interwoven. They cross each other, crisscross each other all throughout the multiverse. And when you can perceive them as frequencies and bandwidths in which physical beings actually inhabit, then you're going to get a more accurate idea of what the dimensions are, rather than the nonsense that materialist scientism is putting out with their string theory. So I wanted to throw this out to at least provide an introductory lesson in dimensions and explain what they are. And you have to ask yourself, if we have so many dimensions, why is everybody like the hive in particular, so focused on the fifth dimension? Why is that the stopping place? Why is that the bus stop where everybody's supposed to get off? Or maybe the sixth dimension? The dimensions go substantially beyond 10. They go substantially beyond what science is even considering. And what they're positing is how these dimensions function is so far wide of the mark, it's goddamn laughable. As you develop yourself, you're going to find that a lot of this information is going to become available to you, and you will have a better understanding than materialist scientism does. So this is the 101 lesson or explanation in how the dimensions are folded together through the multiverse, and how raising your personal vibration through the downloads, enhancing your nervous system to facilitate signal reception, will allow you to reach out there across this dimensional spectrum to get a lot more information than what humans have been provided in the past by the hive and by earthly scientists and spiritual speculators. This is part of the voodoo information, as we call it, because it just gets strange. It goes so far beyond what humans think they know that everyone wants to challenge and question it. Your experiences in time will prove to you that this is how it is. We have no reason to fabricate this information. And you must also understand that we do not have the full explanations. We're still translating this through limited human words and human language. I'm sure it's substantially more complicated than what I'm laying out here. And I don't have the knowledge base at this point in time to relate it any better than what I am. But part of the reason that our ancestors had this God thing is because all the off-world gods operated from higher dimensional frequencies. And this planet was able to facilitate those higher dimensional frequencies while they were here. So we could interact with gods that went up as high as 8th dimensional frequencies. And I use the term gods loosely. I only used it because that's what people understand. They were just different races from different places in the stars that operated from different dimensional frequencies that could work here on this planet because it could facilitate multiple frequencies at the same time. Based on abuse, the frequency capability was shut down and the gods disappeared from our view because the other higher dimensional frequencies became unavailable to our perceptions at that point in time. And that's another story in itself. But anyway, here's your one-on-one course on frequencies and dimensions. Take it under your consideration. Balk if you choose. Listen and learn if you choose. Discernment is always on your shoulders. Go with your feel, not with what you immediately think. And for those of you doing the work, stay the course. Don't give up on yourselves.